Section 5. As I stood there, musing over this too perfect triumph of man, the full moon, yellow and gibbous, came up out of an overflow of silver light in the northeast. The bright little figures ceased to move about below. A noiseless owl flitted by, and I shivered with the chill of the night. I determined to descend and find where I could sleep. I looked for the building I knew. Then my eye travelled along to the figure of the white sphinx upon the pedestal of bronze, growing distinct as the light of the rising moon grew brighter. I could see the silver birch against it. There was the tangle of rhododendron bushes, black in the pale light, and there was the little lawn. I looked at the lawn again. A queer doubt chilled my complacency. No, said I stoutly to myself, that was not the lawn. But it was the lawn, for the white leprous face of the Sphinx was towards it. Can you imagine what I felt as this conviction came home to me? But you cannot. The time machine was gone. At once, like a lash across the face, came the possibility of losing my own age, of being left helpless in this strange new world. The bare thought of it was an actual physical sensation. I could feel it grip me at the throat and stop my breathing. In another moment, I was in a passion of fear and running with great leaping strides down the slope. Once I fell headlong and cut my face. I lost no time in stanching the blood, but jumped up and ran on, with a warm trickle down my cheek and chin. All the time I ran I was saying to myself, they have moved it a little, pushed it under the bushes out of the way. Nevertheless, I ran with all my might, all the time with the certainty that sometimes comes with excessive dread. I knew that such assurance was folly, knew instinctively that the machine was removed out of my reach. My breath came with pain. I suppose I covered the whole distance from the hill crest to the little lawn, 2 miles, perhaps, in 10 minutes, and I am not a young man. I cursed aloud as I ran at my confident folly in leaving the machine, wasting good breath thereby. I cried aloud, and none answered. Not a creature seemed to be stirring in that moonlit world. When I reached the lawn, my worst fears were realized. Not a trace of the thing was to be seen. I felt faint and cold when I faced the empty space among the black tangle of bushes. I ran round it furiously, as if the thing might be hidden in a corner, and then stopped abruptly, with my hands clutching my hair. Above me towered the Sphinx, upon the bronze pedestal, white, shining, leprous, in the light of the rising moon. It seemed to smile in mockery of my dismay. I might have consoled myself by imagining the little people had put the mechanism in some shelter for me, had I not felt assured of their physical and intellectual inadequacy. That is what dismayed me. The sense hitherto unsuspected power, through whose intervention my invention had vanished. Yet of one thing I felt assured. Unless some other age had produced its exact duplicate, the machine could not have moved in time. The attachment of the levers, I will show you the method later, prevented anyone from tampering with it in that way when they were removed. It had moved and was hid, only in space, but then, where could it be? I think I must have had a kind of frenzy. I remember running violently in and out among the moonlit bushes all around the Sphinx, and startling some white animal that, in the dim light, I took for a small deer. I remember, too, late that night, beating the bushes with my clenched fists until my knuckles were gashed and bleeding from the broken twigs. Then, sobbing and raving in my anguish of mind, I went down to the great building of stone. The big hall was dark, silent, and deserted. I slipped on the uneven and fell over one of the malachite tables, almost breaking my shin. I lit a match and went on past the dusty curtains of which I have told you. There I found a second great hall, covered with cushions, upon which perhaps a score or so of the little people were sleeping. I have no doubt they found my second appearance strange enough, coming suddenly out of the quiet darkness with inarticulate noises and the splutter and flare of a match, for they had forgotten about matches. "Where is my time machine?" I began, bawling like an angry child, laying hands upon them and shaking them up together. It must have been very queer to them. Some laughed, most of them looked sorely frightened. When I saw them standing round me, it came into my head that I was doing as foolish a thing as it was possible for me to do under the circumstances in trying to revive the sensation of fear, for, reasoning from their daylight behaviour, I thought that fear must be forgotten. Abruptly, I dashed down the match, and, knocking one of the people over in my course, went blundering across the big dining hall again, out under the moonlight. I heard cries of terror and their little feet running and stumbling this way and that. I do not remember all I did as the moon crept up the sky. I suppose it was the unexpected nature of my loss that maddened me. I felt hopelessly cut off from my own kind, a strange animal in an unknown world. I must have raved to and fro, screaming and crying upon God and fate. I have a memory of horrible fatigue as the long night of despair wore away, of looking in this impossible place and that, of groping among moonlit ruins and touching strange... "Suppose the worst," I said. "Suppose the machine altogether lost, perhaps destroyed. It behooves me to be calm and patient, to learn the way of the people, spare. And after all, it was a beautiful and curious world. But probably the machine had only been taken away. Still, I must be calm and patient, find its hiding place, and recover it by force or cunning." And with that, I scrambled to my feet and looked about me, wondering where I could bathe. I felt weary, stiff, and travel-soiled. The freshness of the morning, their pretty laughing faces, but the devil begotten of fear and blind anger was ill-curbed and still eager to take advantage of my perplexity. The turf gave better counsel. I found a groove ripped in it, about midway between the pedestal of the Sphinx and the marks of my feet where, on arrival, I had struggled with the overturned machine. There were other signs of removal about, with queer narrow footprints like those I could imagine by a... This directed my closer attention to the pedestal. It was, as I think I have said, of bronze. It was not a mere block, but highly decorated. Suppose you were to use a grossly improper gesture to a delicate-minded woman, it is how she would look. They went off as if they had received the last possible insult, and toiled to get into the future age, and now my passion of anxiety to get out of it. I had made myself the most complicated and the most tolerably sure of the avoidance. I was careful, however, to show no concern and to abstain from any pursuit of them, and, in the course of a figurative language, their sentences were usually simple and of 2 words, and I failed to convey or understand any but the simplest propositions. I determined to put through undulating hills, and so faded into the serenity of the sky. A peculiar feature which presently attracted my attention was the side of these wells, and peering down into the shafted darkness, I could see no gleam of water. Nor could I start any reflection with a lighted match. But in all of time, too, I came to connect these wells with tall towers standing here and there upon the slopes, for above them There was often just such a flicker in the sanitary apparatus of these people. Obvious conclusion, but it was absolutely wrong. It was absolutely wrong. And here, I must admit, that I learned very little of drains and bells and modes of conveyance and the like conveniences things to him. And even though he knew how much could he mend either apprehend or believe, then then think of how narrow the gap between that person and the signs of crematoria, nor anything suggestive of tombs. But it occurred to me that possibly there might be cemeteries or crematoria. Possibly there might be cemeteries or crematoria somewhere beyond the range of my explorings. I must confess that my satisfaction with my first theories of an automatic civilization and a decadent humanity did not long endure. Yet I could think of decorated were fairly complex specimens of metalwork. Somehow such things must be made, and the little people of words, of letters even, absolutely unknown to you. Well, on the third day of my visit, that was how the world of 802,000, but not too strongly for even a moderate swimmer. It will give you an idea, therefore, of the strange deficiency of these creatures when I tell you that none made the slightest attempt, evidently made for me and me alone. The thing took my imagination. Very possibly I had been feeling desolate. At any rate, I did my best to display that was the beginning of a queer friendship which lasted a week and ended, as I will tell you. She was exactly like a child. She wanted to be with me always. She tried to follow me everywhere, and seeming fond of me, and showing in her weak, futile way that she cared for me, the little doll of a creature presently gave me return to the neighborhood of the White Sphinx, almost the she simply laughed at them, but she dreaded the dark, dreaded shadows, dreaded black things. Darkness to her was the one thing dreadful. I was still such a blockhead that I missed the lesson of that fear, and in spite of Wiener's distress, I insisted upon sleeping away from these slumbering for her rescue that I was awakened about dawn. I had been restless, dreaming most disagreeably that I was drowned over my face with their soft palps. I woke with a start in the palace. I thought I would make a virtue of necessity and see the sunrise. The moon was setting, and the dying moonlight and the first pallor of dawn were mingled in a ghastly vivid colouring returned upon the world once more. I scanned the view keenly, but I saw no vestige of my white figures. They were mere creatures of the innumerable, some 800,000 years hence, and it was no great wonder to see four at once. But the jest was unsatisfying, and I was thinking of these figures all the more. How much hotter than our own was the weather of this golden age. I cannot account for it. It may be that the sun was hotter, or the earth nearer the sun. It is usual to assume that the sun will go on cooling steadily in the future. But people colossal ruin near the slept and fed. There happened this strange thing, clambering among these heaps of masonry. I found a narrow galley looked into the glaring eyes. I was afraid, looked into the glaring eyes. I was afraid to turn. Then the thought of the absolute security in which humanity appeared to be living. But I know it was a dull white and had large greyish red eyes. Also, that there was flaxen hair on its head and down its back. But as I say, it went too fast for me to see closed by a fallen pillar. A sudden... Could this thing have vanished down the shaft? I lit a match. And looking down, I saw a small, white, moving creature with large bright eyes which regarded me steadily. Like a human spider, it was clambering. And now I saw for the first time a number of metal foot and hand rests forming a kind of ladder down. It dawned on me that man had not remained one species, but had differentiated it into two distinct animals, that my graceful children along the river valley showed how universal were its ramifications. What so natural, then, as to assume that it was an artificial underworld, that such way. There is a tendency to utilize underground space for the less ornamental purposes of civilization. There is the Metropolitan Railway in London, for instance. There are new electric railways, there are subways, and the same widening gulf expense of the higher educational process and the increased facilities for and temptations towards refined habits on the part of the... As it seemed to me, the fine beauty and the etiolated pallor followed naturally enough. The great triumph of humanity I had dreamed of took the industrial system of today. Its triumph had not been simply a triumph over nature, but a triumph over nature and the fellow man. This, I must warn you, was my theory at the time, to decay. The too perfect security of the upper worlders had led them to a slow movement of degeneration, to a general dwindling in size, strength, and intelligence. That I could see clearly enough already. What had happened to the undergrounders I did not yet suspect, but from what I had seen of the Morlocks, that, by the by, was the name by which these creatures were called, I could imagine that she refused to answer them. She shivered as though it was unendurable, and when I pressed her,